been asked to fill the pulpit for someone, and we had Brother Bobby Sanders done a tremendous job last week. And so let's do a quick recap of those first 6 verses in Genesis chapter 30. We're looking at the marital problems of a polygamist, amen. There's some laws that God has put down, and when you break those laws, there's consequences. And Jacob is running into some marital problems. We see that throughout our nation today. I think we see some parallels. God decides whether something is sin or not. Men's laws only reflect what they think of God's laws. We see some of the laws that have been changed in our country, the Roe versus Wade and the abortions, the killing of babies. That's against God's laws, but man's laws says it's all right, but that doesn't make it all right, amen. I think we are experiencing some of the judgment of God on our nation. You know, I look throughout the Old Testament, and we've seen time and time again when Israel would break God's laws, what would God do? He'd raise up another nation, and they would bring Israel under subjection to them, and God would use that other nation to humble Israel. And I think we kind of see that. I think God's raised up the Democrats to humble our nation, amen. We're in a difficult situation where God's law says marriage is one man, one woman, and man's laws have changed God's laws to where we got men marrying men and women marrying women, and then we got the transgender situation going on. It's a mess. But we see here in Genesis chapter 30, Jacob breaks God's laws. He's kind of tricked into it by Laban. His original intention was he just wanted to marry Rachel. He fell in love with Rachel. He prayed about the situation, was led to this area to find a wife, and he found a wife, and he ended up with 2 wives plus 2 concubines. And he's starting to experience a situation that's he didn't intend. Let's read those first 5 verses, and then we'll pick up in verse 6 this morning. Genesis chapter 30, verse 1 says, when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said unto Jacob, give me children, or else I die. And so to be a barren woman in this time was shameful for her. She felt shame. She wanted children, and it just wasn't a good situation. It was an embarrassment to her. So she's in a desperate situation. Now, when Hannah was in a similar situation, Hannah took a different route. She took her problems to God, amen. And she realized it was God who was in control of whether she would have children or not. And so Hannah prayed about it, and God answered her prayer and gave her a son who she named Samuel. And Samuel became the first of the great prophets of Israel. Now, Rachel doesn't do this. She doesn't take her issues to the Lord. She takes her issues to her husband, and she says, give me children or else I die. Well, we looked a little bit a couple weeks ago about this situation, and she does die, giving birth to her second son. God does give her 2 boys, One, Joseph, who becomes one of the greatest types of Christ in all the Old Testament, and her second son, Benjamin, which becomes an elite tribe of Israel. And Brother Travis pointed out to me, I was looking for that verse about the tribe of Benjamin there in Judges chapter 20. I wrote it down this time, amen. Let's look at that real quick. Judges chapter 20. Talking about the tribe of Benjamin. And later on in Israel's history, there will be a civil war, and they become divided, the northern tribes and the southern tribes. The northern tribes were made up of 10 tribes, but the southern tribe was only made up of 2 tribes, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. And it shows you what a tremendous tribe Benjamin was. They could hold their own. They were a fighting tribe. They were a tribe that you didn't want to get riled up, amen. And there's a couple great men that came from the tribe of Benjamin. King Saul, who became the first king of Israel, was from the tribe of Benjamin. And the Bible talks how that he was head and shoulders above everybody else. He's a very big, impressive-looking, strong, tall man. And another significant person who came from the tribe of Benjamin was also by the name of Saul. In fact, he was probably named after King Saul. They were both Benjamites, and of course we know him better as the Apostle Paul, my opinion, the greatest Christian that ever lived. So those were 2 great heroes that came from the tribe of Benjamin. But we look there in Judges chapter 20, verse 15 and 16. Yeah. It says, and the children of Benjamin were numbered at that time out of the cities 26,000 men that drew sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, which were numbered 700 chosen men. Among all this people, there were 700 chosen men left-handed, every one who could sling stones at a hair breadth and not miss. They were snipers with the slingshot, amen, or with the stones. Being they were an elite fighting group, and these men were all left-handed. We got some left-handed people in the church, and Peyton's left-handed, amen. But the Benjamites, they were a tribe you wouldn't want to mess with. And their mother was Rachel, and she died in giving birth to Benjamin. Going back to Genesis chapter 30, Rachel says, give me children or else I die. And verse 2 says, and Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel. The honeymoon's over, amen. There's that. But this is what happened. Sin is in the picture because there's multiple wives involved in this situation, which God allowed, but God didn't approve. But he allowed it. And we see that in our nation. God doesn't approve of abortion. God doesn't approve of gay marriage. God doesn't approve of transgenderism. But that stuff is going on in our country, and there's going to be consequences for that. There's consequences to Jacob's actions here, and we're seeing that. There's a jealousy between Leah and Rachel, and it's causing problems in the home. Rachel says, give me children or else I die. And she doesn't say that to God. She's saying that to Jacob. And Jacob says, well, I'm doing what I can do. Jacob understood that children comes from the Lord. Amen. Jacob understood Genesis chapter 20, verse 18. Genesis chapter 20, verse 18 says, let's back up to verse 17. This is the story of Abraham. Genesis chapter 20, verse 17 says, so Abraham prayed unto God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maidservants, and they bare children. For the Lord had fast closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Children come from the Lord. And Rachel apparently didn't quite understand this. She's embarrassed. She feels shame. She's frustrated. And she brings her problems to Jacob, and instead of taking her problems to the Lord, which, Jacob needs to know about how she feels and everything, but Jacob can't do anything for her in that sense. It takes the Lord. Whenever someone is born, it's because God allows it, amen. I've heard statements made, I feel sorry for children growing up in this day and age. But children that are born today, that's by God's will, amen. That's by God's design. They are born for a time such as this. God intended for the children that are born today to be born today. That's His will. How do we know that? Let's go to Revelation chapter 4. Revelation chapter 4. You say, why am I here? Why am I living in 2021? Why is that? Well, because God intended for you to be here, amen. And I'll give you a Bible verse to prove that. Revelation chapter 4. Revelation chapter 4, it only has 11 verses in that chapter, and we're going to look at the last verse in Revelation chapter 4. So, Revelation chapter 4, verse 11. You ever run into somebody and they question why they're here? Why am I here? Why am I born? Why? Well, Revelation chapter 4:11 is the answer to that. It shows people around the throne worshiping God. And it says, and they say, "Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created